I wanted to touch on three things. There are too many things to discuss, unfortunately. But I want to just touch on two very quickly. One at somewhat greater length, and then obviously be happy to try and answer any questions or respond to any points that any of you might want to make. First, on the defense budget situation, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the disaster that we're facing here. I think the Center has just issued a very important paper on some of the implications of the budget cuts, not just that we will face if the sequestration takes place, but the aggregate budget cuts of the 4 years of hopefully Obama's first and only term. This is just a debilitating series of consequences for the military. It will have reverberations for decades to come. Even if there's a Republican president after next January, the depth of the hole that we're digging for ourselves and the things we've already done is going to be very difficult to get out of. And obviously our adversaries around the world are following this very closely. Now, I don't know, and you all are in a better position to know what might be doable legislatively in the next year. Senators Kyle and McCain and Graham and perhaps others, I think, started something yesterday. I just think politically, among many other things that the Obama administration has given us, this is something that people will understand. And I think it's important looking forward, if we do get a Republican president, we do keep the House, and we do get the Senate, that we have made the case that in those happy circumstances that we have a mandate to reverse these cuts, and that nobody's surprised about it or anything else. So I'm more than happy to help with anything that people up here think might be workable, whether it's the initiative that was announced yesterday or whatever other creative ideas there are. This is if Obama had proposed this level of defense budget cutting straight up, without being engulfed in the budget negotiations or anything else, we would have opposed it as a horror show. And instead, it crept up on us. You can argue about how we got here, whether we were out negotiated. I think that's all history at this point. I think it's got to be a focus of ours to make sure that not only the sequestration cuts don't actually happen, but that we repair some of the damage of the cuts that have already been made. So just to emphasize what I know all of you know already, this to me is one of our highest national security priorities, just because it affects everything else that we do. Second is the Law of the Sea Treaty. Now, I know some of you on the House side probably say, oh, well, that's a Senate matter. Let me just urge you to consider that if this treaty is adopted, it has enormous implications for domestic affairs in this country. We've already seen the Law of the Sea Tribunal, which is supposed to have a limited jurisdiction, try to assert jurisdiction over domestic economic policy in member states who have acceded to the Law of the Sea. I've heard a lot of different things. I'm sure you're all hearing different things. They're going to try and bring it up after the Indiana Senate primary, one way or the other. They're going to do this, they're going to do that. I don't purport to have any inside information on what the proponents are going to try and do with this thing, but we have fought it. The Center has been at the center of that for a long time. This was a bad idea when it was negotiated in the 1970s and the 1980s. Reagan rejected it. They've tried to fix it. They have not fixed it. It's still a bad idea. It doesn't get better with age. As I say, if anything, as you watch the Law of the Sea Treaty being implemented, it demonstrates the flaws that its opponents have raised over the years. So really, just to raise the flag here, when anybody hears anything, I just think it's important to communicate to Frank and his folks and everybody, because this is hopefully, if there's a Republican president, we can kill it once for all, unsign it, pull it back, which we didn't do in the Bush administration, although we should have. So just to be on the alert for that, whatever the proponents may try and do. And then my third point is Iran and Iran's nuclear weapons program. I'm not going to rehearse all of the arguments. I've been writing on this ever since I got out of the government. My view, I think, has been very clear for a long time that sanctions and diplomacy are not going to work, have not worked, that we are now at the point where the most likely outcome is that Iran gets nuclear weapons. In my view, there is only one other alternative solution. It's not a happy solution, but realistically, it is the preemptive use of military force against Iran's nuclear weapons program. And I think we've seen just in the past couple of weeks evidence in public that that we may be nearing a very critical point. And while we may have the debate among presidential candidates about what they would do after January the 20th of next year, I'm not sure we've got the luxury to wait until January 20 before something critical happens. And just to review the bidding, we've got Leon Panetta saying twice within the past week that Iran could have a nuclear weapon if it wanted it within a year. Let's not forget that the administration leaked in April of last year that same prediction. My view is, and this is supported by analysis by independent groups like the Wisconsin Project, the Non-Proliferation Education Center, Iran could enrich to weapons-grade uranium at reactor grade it already has in about 2 months. The IAEA says they have enough low-enriched uranium for 4 nuclear weapons. There's nothing new the Iranians have to discover or invent to get weaponization. They've been working on it steadily despite what the 2007 NIE has said. And I think they could have a weapon, crude though it might be, in substantially less than a year. But like everything else, this is based on what we think we know about the Iranian program. And the reality is there's a lot we don't know about the Iranian program, and what we don't know is not good news. We don't know how much they've cooperated with North Korea. We don't know whether they've got enrichment facilities in North Korea. There's a lot we don't know. I think that we need to take the Iranian situation for what it has manifestly been in the last several years. They are very close. Do we know the precise date when weaponization will take place? No. Should that give us comfort? No. The idea that you can play the game that says, oh, it's another year. Well, no, I think actually it's 12 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days before they get nuclear weapons is a fool's errand. You only have to miss by 1 day, and then the Iranians have a retaliatory capacity that is nuclear. So when you have Panetta saying it's they could do it in a year, it's time to be very, very worried. Now, he goes on to say that it would take another year or 2 after that for the Iranians to be able to mate a warhead to a ballistic missile that would be deliverable over some long range. That may be true, it may not be true, but they don't need a ballistic missile to make it a danger to us and many of our friends and allies. They can take the device and put it in a boxcar and put it in a tramp steamer and sail it anywhere they can. So the threat really exists once they get the weaponization capability. And it has always been a terrorist threat. That's what the purpose is. It's not a serious military threat to us. It's a threat to our civilian population and the civilian population of our friends and allies. Now, I think that the testimony, ironically, the testimony this week up here by the heads of the intelligence agencies only underlines how dangerous the situation has become, despite the effort by the administration to have the threat as the Iranians are now prepared to engage in terrorist activities on American soil because they're worried about the threats we're making to their nuclear weapons program, as if it's our fault they're about to conduct terrorist operations on our soil, shouldn't divert from the fact that the Iranians had already begun to plan terrorist operations on our soil. Maybe General Clapper should talk to the Justice Department and read the indictment of the Revolutionary Guards leaders accused of conspiring to kill the Saudi Arabian ambassador here in Washington. But in any event, if you think it's bad that the Iranians are prepared to engage in terrorism now, what do you think it's going to be like when they get nuclear weapons? Do you think they're going to give up their terrorist activities at that point? So the testimony to me simply underlines the gravity of the threat posed by their proximity to weaponization. And in fact, I think the most interesting thing came not in the prepared testimony, but in response, at least that I saw, to a question that Senator Coates of Indiana posed to Clapper, and Clapper's response, where he basically said that none of the sanctions in place now had caused the slightest impact in policy or program terms on Iran's nuclear weapons program. That means everything that has been done up until now, in Clapper's view, an advocate for the administration position that it wants negotiation with Iran, that all of that has accomplished nothing. So when you hear the administration's spin about the congressional sanctions just enacted, which, as you all know, the administration opposed and got waiver authority put into, or the EU's sanctions on imports of Iranian petroleum, think about the race where we start today with the sanctions having had no impact, with Iran being within a year by the administration's own admission, and our sanctions not taking effect until this June. Who do you think is going to win this race? I mean, this isn't even close, in my view, taking the world as the administration itself sees it. And I think fundamentally the administration understands that, and that's why they have, for the last several years, put such unremitting pressure on Israel not to take military action against the Iranian program. My understanding is that they have implicitly threatened Israel that they would not resupply planes or ordnance and other significant equipment lost in strikes against Iran, and I think that's a very serious threat, given that losses to Israel could be very extensive, and given that one way Iran might retaliate for an Israeli attack would be to unleash Hezbollah. If Israel couldn't get air superiority over the Bekaa Valley, its civilian population would be very much at risk, and that has to add enormously to the gravity of the calculation that Israel's leaders have to make. Now, I don't think Obama's threat is sustainable. I think Congress would roll over him. But I do think it opens a window of vulnerability to the Israelis before Congress could react and Obama would have to back away, particularly in an election year. And it's in light of that campaign of pressure against Israel that I read this David Ignatius column in the Washington Post today, where Leon Panetta, I guess without anything better to do, speculates that the Israeli attack is likely to occur in the spring of this year. And I'm told by press people that when they went to the Defense Department and said, you know, did he maybe speak a little out of turn? You want to roll that back a little bit yet? They have refused to do it. So I think he said it deliberately. I think they knew what they were doing. The only way I think you can read it is they're worried that's when the attack might occur, and they're trying to pressure Israel now publicly, being unsure of their success in pressuring it privately. Israel was never going to have strategic surprise on this. It's a very difficult operation for them to mount. The usual suspects are already out there once again saying that Israel really cannot be effective if it does take military action. I saw a story quoting Tony Cordesman to that effect. I remember back in 1991, Tony explaining that an attack against Iraq for the invasion of Kuwait would cost the United States tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of casualties. Right again. But you can expect to see more of this. I don't know what the Israelis are going to do, but I think we need to be prepared to one, make the intellectual case that an Israeli strike, if it occurs, would be a legitimate exercise of Israel's right to self-defense, which, by the way, would also be the case if we had an administration here that would be willing to act in our self-defense. And number two, to make it clear that Israel would have enormous political support if it took that very difficult decision to act. I think this is obviously a very difficult, unpleasant choice between unpleasant alternatives. But as has been true since 2008, if not before, if there are only two choices, a nuclear Iran and an attack against its nuclear program, to me, that's not much of a choice. The administration view, I think, really, their plan B is, you know, we don't like a nuclear Iran, but a nuclear Iran can be contained and deterred as we contained and deterred the Soviet Union. I think that's foolish. I don't think the mullahs in Tehran think the way the communists did in Moscow. I think their history is different, their objectives are different, their environment is different, and that containing and deterring a group of religious fanatics is not the kind of world I'd like to live in, hoping every day that they won't get up and push the button. But even if I'm completely wrong on that, even if you could contain and deter a nuclear Iran, it obviously doesn't stop with Iran. If they get nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will, Egypt will, Turkey will, perhaps others. And so in a relatively brief period of time, as these things go, 5 or 10 years, you could have half a dozen nuclear weapon states in the Middle East. This is a formula for disaster, which is why I've been fixated for so long on stopping Iran in the first place. If you don't stop Iran, the consequences just go from horrible to terrible. So you know, we don't know exactly what the Iranians will do. We don't know what the Israelis will do. But there is at least a prospect, and I think a more serious prospect over the next 6, 9, 12 months than in the past several years, that we could come to the boiling point on the Iranian nuclear weapons program. And as I say, being ready for what we can do here without control of the executive branch, but what we can do in Congress, intellectually and politically, I think is going to be very, very important, because if this starts to happen, it will happen at blinding speed. We're not going to have consultations from the Israelis first. We'll know about it when we wake up some morning. And the administration will react in whatever way they react. So really, just to highlight that and to say, in my view, having watched this very closely over the past 10 years or more, I do think we are at a very dangerous point for the United States and our friends and allies in the region, and time for all of us to be prepared. I do think that that we could do a better job collectively, all of us, by making what I think is the clear case that we cannot ultimately have a prosperous America without having a strong international presence. Whatever order and stability there is in the world is because of us. It didn't happen because of international organizations or the goodwill of our adversaries out there. It happens because we and allies take the steps we need to take. And why that order, such as it is so gravely threatened by these defense cuts. And it goes the other way, too. You obviously can't have a strong international U.S. presence without a viable domestic economy. And the idea that, as I think Obama has had, that he can restructure the United States into a European-style social democracy and ignore the rest of the world is just wrong. And I just don't think we have carried the debate at the national level as effectively as we should have, and I think that's demonstrated in this hopeless, the way we were hopelessly out-negotiated on the sequestration process. So I think it's something all of us have to do more of to raise the issues. And I think also, I would disagree with the political tacticians in this sense. I think, you know, the American people are very rational about how they assess national security issues. They do not waste their time focusing on a lot of specifics that are never going to affect them on a daily basis. But when they look at presidential candidates, they know that under our system, the president has enormous authority in foreign and defense policy. And therefore, in judging presidential candidates, they see foreign policy as proxy for qualities in a president that they prize: leadership, judgment, persistence, integrity. And in many respects, when you state a firm case for America's role in the world, for the importance to our domestic way of life, that they understand that that is signaling leadership, which is what we want most in a president, what we haven't had for the last 3 years. So I think for all of us are backing probably different candidates and have different views on them, but for those who are in campaigns, I just say, urge your campaigns to have the candidate talk more about it, insist that we have more discussion of it in the debates, and here in Congress raise the issues more often too. I think this is an important venue and sounding board, and the more we talk about the interrelationship between domestic prosperity and international security and the devastating direction that the Obama White House has taken us, I think that's all to the good. I have also always felt that regime change had to be central to dealing with Iran. Ultimately, if we had worked more on regime change going back 10 years, we wouldn't be in the circumstance we're in today. But, you know, regime change isn't something you can turn on and off like a light switch. In this race metaphor that I've used, I think they're going to get nuclear weapons before we could affect regime change. But at an absolute minimum, that's what we would have to do. And whether there's anything at that point that you can do militarily once they get nuclear weapons, I don't know. I suspect it would be very dangerous and very complicated. That's why, as I said before, I've fixated on stopping them from getting the capability, because everything gets harder after that. And that's why I also think the argument that you frequently hear against the military option is it will draw the Iranian people closer in to support the regime. Look, I've talked to a lot of Iranian Americans who say that's absolutely not right. But if the strike were accompanied with a vigorous regime change campaign explaining to the people of Iran why why Israel was attacking the nuclear weapons program, I think we could prevent that rallying around. That regime is very unpopular for a lot of reasons. And if we had done more, as I say, to undermine the regime, we might be in a very different place today. Yeah. Well, I think the Fordo facility at Qum is the most difficult part for Israel. And it's also why I first favored the use of military force about 3 years ago, because every day that goes by, the military option window closes. And you can virtually be certain that if Iran got as far as they did with that facility near Qum, that there are other deeply buried and hardened targets that they're building elsewhere. And obviously, the worst outcome is somebody undertakes the strike and doesn't finish the job. The key thing, however, is for the strike to break Iran's control over the nuclear fuel cycle at one or more key points, to slice through it so that they can't get from uranium in the ground to a nuclear weapon. And I think, at least based on what we know, there are several places where that can be done. You mentioned the uranium enrichment facility at Natanz. It is true that is buried and hardened. But one advantage we have there is that the IAEA has been all over it, and they know exactly where it is. They know how deeply buried it is. They know how hardened it is. At least as of now, I think Israel can stop. Would they do as good a job as we could do? No, because our Air Force's standards for destroying an underground facility are, you know, lifting it up off its foundations and putting it about 10 feet in another direction. What the Israelis have to do is destroy the centrifuges inside. These are incredibly sensitive, sophisticated machines, and you put several thousand pounds of air pressure into one of those centrifuge halls and crush them like so many bowling pins, and even if the structure's still there, the key aspect of the uranium enrichment technology will be destroyed. But perhaps the most vulnerable is the facility that probably gets the least attention, is the uranium conversion facility at Esfahan. You've got to go from, as you know, uranium as a solid to uranium as a gas. That has been a weak point in the Iranian program for years. That facility is above ground. That's undoubtedly one that they would consider duplicating at some unknown location to us. But in terms of being able to break their conversion capability, I think that's right there above ground. Would it be better if the United States did it? Absolutely. Are we going to get blamed for it anyway? Yes, which is why I've always argued that whether with the Israelis or alone, we should be involved in it. I just don't see, I hope somebody will tell me I'm wrong, I see zero chance this administration will do that, zero. Yeah. Well, on the intelligence side, I think that for a long time our human intelligence capabilities have been woefully inadequate, and as wonderful as our technical capabilities are, Iran's a good example. There's so little we know about the internal dynamics and whatnot, and North Korea proves that in spades. My own view is that in North Korea they followed the script on regime change. They've established the outward appearance of continuity and stability, but I don't believe for a second that's what's actually going on underneath. I think that hereditary succession of communist dictators is not an inevitable progression, and I think the potential for instability is real. I think, honestly, we should have been, for years, helping to promote that, since the only long-term solution to the North Korean nuclear weapons problem is reunifying the peninsula, which requires a lot of heavy lifting with China. It's got enormous difficulties, but simply accepting that this regime stays in power and continues to develop not only its own nuclear capabilities, but undoubtedly is working with others. That Syrian reactor that they were building wasn't because of their long cultural affinity with Syria. It's because undoubtedly they were involved with Iran in hiding their activities from prying international eyes. So I'm very concerned about the continued North Korean activity and its implications in Northeast Asia and really globally. Could I just come back to the first point about the question of the effect on international oil markets? You know, one of the things I think the friendly Arab regimes of the Gulf fear as much as Israel is Iran with nuclear weapons, and they know they don't have the capability to do anything about it. They live in fear of this administration not doing anything about it, and although publicly these regimes would probably condemn Israel if they attacked the Iranian nuclear weapons program, privately they would be doing whatever their equivalent is of popping champagne corks that somebody had taken care of the problem. And I think they would also respond as they would in the case of an Iranian effort to close the Strait of Hormuz, to increase oil production and get it out to bring down the inevitable spike in oil prices that would occur if Israel did attack. I really don't think that the horror warnings about a general outbreak of war in the Middle East are even close to being accurate. And I think what's going on now in Syria is as much a proxy war between the Saudis and the Iranians as anything you could imagine. So, look, I'm not here to argue that the military option is a highly desirable way to go. I'm arguing that in a world where choices are often unattractive, of the two choices we've got, this is the way to go. But I do think it's worth thinking now about how we mitigate the impact on our economy of whatever those consequences might be. And I think getting our oil economists and others to be thinking about it in advance would be a very prudent way to proceed, absolutely.